try and stand... Can everyone hear me all right? Are we still having problems with mic?
No, you're good.
Perfect. I'll try and stand here so you can kind of see what I've got on the screens there. But yeah, I'm here to talk about journalism, really, because it's something that I've always been really fascinated in, and over the last couple of years I've spent an inordinate amount of my time looking into how stories make the news and what kind of stories make the news, and how those stories get selected. Because I think when people still think of journalists today, they tend to have a very old-fashioned mindset about what a journalist actually is. You might think that there are people who are tenacious seekers of the truth, and in many cases that's true, although not necessarily always. And you'll think about them as being people who are out on the streets. They'll have a network of sources where they can source their own stories, try and tackle the bad guys themselves and try and find out what's going on themselves. You might even think of someone with a little trilby press card in the hat, a little notepad where they lick a pencil before they start writing, that kind of thing. Maybe Lois Lane, that type of thing. And maybe sort of 20, 30 years ago, most journalists would be like that. That's the kind of thing you'd expect to see in a newsroom. But the times have really changed, and there's a lot going on that doesn't fit that model at all. These days, I'm sure you've all noticed that when you pick up a newspaper, it doesn't matter which newspaper you pick up, often they're reporting exactly the same stories. It's true that the TV news, the radio news, it's always the same stories that get reported, often in exactly the same ways. And you might think this is because there's some sort of shadowy cabal of people who sit around deciding what news gets told and what the agenda is. But it's not. It's something much simpler than that. Most news stories these days are taken directly off the newswire. That's where the agenda is set. It's a way of making sure that all news is being disseminated through the different media sources, the same stories that are getting told. And the newswire, well, the newswire is it's news agencies whose job it is to go to places and check out the stories themselves, to do the kind of jobs that journalists would have been doing, to go to the different locations and to report the news, to write up what's going on. So if Robert Mugabe tomorrow gives a speech in Zimbabwe saying he's the greatest president Africa's ever seen, there'll be someone from the Press Association or Associated Press or another news agency there to report that the speech took place, that it was attended by so many people, that it took place in this particular area, and how many people turned up, and what Mugabe said. They don't then have to write context into what was said. Their job isn't to then put that in context of history and to try and explain why Mugabe isn't the greatest Prime Minister anyone in Africa's ever seen. Their job is just to report what actually happened. So the news agencies, they're a fantastic tool for getting information out, because as soon as they put their stories up there, it gets sent out to every news organisation in the world. They can pick those stories up. So they're a great source for disseminating information, but only if that information is true. And the idea is there's redundancy built into the machine, that journalists will take the news off the newswire, and then they'll do their own checking, they'll do the fact-checking, they'll look back into the history of stories, they're looking to add context and their own texture, and that way we can root out what's true and what isn't true. So the news agencies, their job is just to report what happens, and then the journalists turn that into news, and that's ideally what's meant to happen. So it's meant to be a starting point, but all too often it isn't a starting point, and all too often, as I'll show throughout the course of this talk, it's actually what ends up being printed. In the UK, the biggest news agency is the Press Association, and they put out hundreds, thousands of stories a day from all around the world, and there's a few of those that I'll touch on later on. And the level at which the Press Association has control over the agenda of the news is absolutely staggering. There was a study carried out from Cardiff University. Dr. Andrew Williams at Cardiff University spent a fortnight, he took a fortnight's worth of news from 2008 and analysed where that news was sourced, where it came from, to track it back, to see exactly how those stories became news. And he actually found that 30% of news stories in the 4 main quality newspapers, and the Daily Mail, which doesn't count as a quality newspaper. There is a lot of Daily Mail in this talk. Anyone who's offended by that, probably best leave now, because it does contain Daily Mail. There should be a warning up front. But yeah, they found that 30% of news stories in the main 4 newspapers and the Daily Mail came directly from news agencies. And it wasn't just that the agenda was set, it wasn't just that the stories were listed by the news agency, it was actually copied verbatim. So what went out from the news agency to the journalist actually went out word for word in the newspaper, in the 4 main quality newspapers and the Daily Mail. And then a further 19% were largely dependent on agency copy. This isn't necessarily word for word, but it's whole chunks of paragraphs, it's quoted sources, it's the real essence of the story is directly put in from the news agency. So it's really, really endemic. That's 49% of all news stories, and what we consider to be good journalism actually comes directly from the news agencies. And this is true also of, it was true in the radio news, the TV news, the BBC is also sort of victim of this. There was actually a memo from the BBC, which I've seen, where editors at the BBC passed down to their journalists a note saying, anything that comes in from the newswire is considered golden copy. It's fine. You don't have to check it, you don't have to make any phone calls, you don't even have to edit it, because that's all been done by someone else. So, in this world where the BBC have to put out stories online as soon as they happen, accuracy isn't as important as immediacy. So it's better to get the story up there than to spend an extra hour or two checking facts and be trumped by someone else. So it's actually a memo by the BBC saying, just put Associated Press, Press Association copy straight onto the site, it's fine. It's been checked by someone else, and if it hasn't, that's their fault. The worst thing about this, really, is that news agency copy gets so far in the newspaper, but it's very, very reported as such. It's very, very rarely attributed to being Press Association. In the Daily Mail, actually, anytime you see Daily Mail reporter as the byline, that's actually the Press Association. It's absolutely everywhere, and I've got plenty of examples later on, but if you, next time you're on the Daily Mail website, I'm sure you all go on the Daily Mail website on a near hourly basis if you're anything like me. Yeah, Daily Mail reporter, it's always the Press Association, near 100%. Here's a good example, and as Ian mentioned, I did the 1023 campaign last year. I don't know if anyone heard about it, but we took an overdose of homeopathy in the streets all around the country to prove that it didn't work. It was big and silly, which is pretty much all I specialise in. And this is how it was reported on the BBC homepage. This was top story on the BBC homepage, the #1 story for that day. You can see there, nice big quote here, which I've blown up in case you can't read it. Michael Marshall from the NSS said, "We believe blah, 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 blah." Some very wise words there from a very wise person. This is what was on the BBC story. This was the Independent story, exactly the same quote. This is the Daily Mail, sorry, first screen grab of the Daily Mail for the talk, I do apologise, but there's going to be loads more. This is the Daily Mail version. Not just the same quote, but word for word the same story. Protesters today staged a mass overdose of homeopathic remedies, exactly word for word, all the way down. 3 separate news stories, all the same words, the same quotes. Now, I didn't speak to the BBC, and I didn't speak to the Independent, and I definitely didn't speak to the Daily Mail. And it's to my eternal chagrin that I was quoted accurately by the Daily Mail. I expected, if one day I'm in the Daily Mail, I expect at the very least to be misquoted, to be misrepresented. I'm eternally embarrassed that they got me accurate. I did one interview that day to the Press Association, about half an hour before we took our mass overdose. And that's the interview that made the whole copy for all of those stories, and many others as well. It was in The Guardian, it was in most of the newspapers that day, held the copy directly from the Press Association that I spoke to that morning. Now, what I find really interesting about that is, prior to the overdose, I'd spent a week on the phone to the BBC trying to get someone interested. I was trying to flog it to the local BBC to say, look, this is a Merseyside story, it's going to make news, hopefully around the country, possibly around the world, and it did, which is fantastic. And I want to give you everything on this. I want to give you access to us, to the people who've designed this, to all of the resources. I want to give you everything you need to do a proper story on this. And I couldn't for the life of me get anyone down to the Liverpool street that we took the overdose on the day. No one was interested. But the second it goes out on the Press Association, on the newswire, this wasn't just ran by the BBC, it was ran nationally as their #1 story. Their headline for the day was our story. No one was interested when I put it on my plate, but when Press Association put it out there, it's golden copy. It goes straight in. You don't have to check it. I didn't get a phone call from the BBC to check it was true. They had my details, didn't get a phone call. The newswire is king. And you might wonder, well, why is this the case? Why would a self-respecting journalist, and there are plenty of self-respecting journalists, and there are some journalists out there who still do a fantastic job. If you're a journalist, why would you put your name to something that you didn't write, when your job is to write? And to answer this question, you've got to look back at the history of newspapers a little bit, in the recent history. And it sort of comes down to, and I do apologise again for having a photo of Rupert Murdoch, who is, as I point out, part media mogul, part testicle, as you can see there. Right about 20 years ago, I mean, people like Rupert Murdoch, businessmen, bought up newspapers. And for all the ideological impact, Murdoch owning his newspapers, The Sun and the News of the World and The Times, for all the ideological impact and control he has, and he has a phenomenal control, and you can see that in the way that the stories are reported, that his hand is very, very big in Fox News, that kind of thing. But it's not his ideology that made the biggest impact on the way that news is actually reported today, but his business sense, and the business sense of people like him who bought newspapers. Because prior to 30, 40 years ago, to own a newspaper was to be a man of standing. It was people like Henry Ford who owned a newspaper. It was you're a guy who wants to have a reputation, boost his ego, and be seen as the kind of guy who owns a newspaper. So it wasn't necessarily a business, it wasn't necessarily something you made money off. It was a way of showing that you're an upstanding man of the community, that you're an important person. And then Murdoch and people took over, and they thought, well, let's make money off this. There's a real opportunity here to make money. And like any businessman who's taken over a new business, you start looking for loss. You start looking for where you can get rid of people. So what they did is they saw that there was a specialist court reporter, a guy whose job it was to sit in court all day. And they thought, well, why do that? Why not wait until the stories come out of court, and we'll just get a general journalist to cover it? Why do I need a health reporter when I can get a general journalist to just sort of do it themselves? Why do I need someone to, do science stories? A general journalist can do all of those things. So the specialist journalists got laid off, and the general journalists just had to pick them up where they could. There's some fantastic stories that actually got lost by the fact that there wasn't a court reporter. I think it was in 2006, 2007, something around there. There was a case where a 13-year-old boy who'd already realised that he was gay, he'd come out of the closet, was fighting to be adopted by gay parents. He said, it should be my right to choose my gay parents. They're not going to influence my lifestyle. If anything, they have more relation to my lifestyle. So I want to be adopted by gay parents. And this was a story that didn't make a single page of a newspaper anywhere in the country, because there wasn't a court reporter to pick it up, and by the time it got out there, the story was months ago. It wasn't news anymore. It was yesterday's news, literally. And not only do you kill off the specialist reporters, but then the onus then is on the reporters who are still there to treble their workload. They have to now do the job of the court reporter, of the science reporter, the health reporter, and their own job, and check on those stories where dog bites man and man bites dog. That now becomes the remit of a single journalist or a small team of journalists. The study in 2008 showed that today journalists have to write 3 times as much copy per day as they did 20 years ago. They still only have the same number of hours in a day. So they've got to make this fit. And so certain things get cut away, certain things get dropped, and what gets dropped is you no longer have time to source your own stories, to speak to people, to check facts. You're no longer out on the street. As a journalist, your job, by and large, barring a very few exceptions, is to sit at your desk and churn out copy. You're just a copy machine a lot of the time. And this can lead to some real blind spots in the media that can be utterly exploited. And there's a guy, Chris Atkins, I don't know if anyone's heard of Chris Atkins, he did a film Starsuckers, which was utterly brilliant. And he's going to be speaking at QED, by the way, so you should go, it's going to be a fantastic scene. He illustrated the point that there's some massive blind spots in the media by selling fake stories to them. I know he did this for his film, he actually did it, he funded his way through university doing it, it's fantastic. But this is one fake story here. That there is Sarah Harding from Girls Aloud, the pop band. The newspaper, in case you can't read it here, this is The Sun, 2nd of April. I thought Sarah Harding's bedtime reading wouldn't stretch much further than the latest guide to London's nightlife, but the Girls Aloud star is a secret stargazer with much more weighty tomes on her bedside table. Top of her current reading list is Brainbox Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. Total bullshit. Chris just made this up. Absolutely made it up whole cloth. This story wasn't true, and yet it got printed in the newspaper and on the website. Now what's interesting here is, presumably, Gordon Smart, whoever the fuck that is, at Sun Magazine's celebrity column would know how to get in contact with Sarah Harding's agent, if not her himself. That phone call never took place. A single call to the agent. Does she read astrophysics books in her spare time? It would have answered that question. That call never took place because it made a good story and you haven't got the time to check your own facts, you haven't got the time to source your own stories. That was 600 quid Chris Atkins made out of, well, he could have made out of that story, and this is how he funded his way through university. It's that easy. As I've covered, there are very few, and I'm sure if people keep their eye on skepticism and science reporting, things like that, it's absolutely clear that a lot of journalists just simply aren't science trained. And the ones who deal with science stories, health stories, they simply have no grounding in the background of those stories. They have no science training, and that's absolutely clear when you look at the health stories that come out these days. There's a real vacuum in expertise and a vacuum in sourcing. And where there is this vacuum, where there's this hole in content, where you have to provide content, the onus is on you, the pressure is on you as a journalist to provide 3 times as much content as you would have had to done 20 years ago. If somebody comes to you with 500 words of pre-written copy, you're going to bite their hands off. You're not even going to bother checking it. You might put printed verbatim, you might put it in your own words, often you'll just put it in their own words. And this is where the PR companies come in. Because their job is to provide that 500 words of copy. It's probably worth pointing out, to just briefly covering at this point, what PR actually is. It's worth thinking about it as it's a method of getting, promoting a business, a service, or individual in the media. It's a way of getting a message or a statement into the public domain. But it's a bit more subtle than that. It's not like advertising where it's really obvious. The idea is to try and get people's names, the company's names mentioned in a way that people wouldn't necessarily realise that they're being mentioned because it's an advert, because it's being paid for. And because of that, rarely is it made clear that it's PR. It's kind of counterintuitive, but for them to point out that this is PR, so they try and slide it in any places they can. And it's much more subtle than straight out advertising, which, as you know, advertising sometimes isn't very subtle. Yeah. Here's one example. This is an example of a PR story that I picked up on the 16th of October 2009. For anyone who can't read this, the headline, "Just like that, Tommy Cooper's likeness lives on the bottom of a meat pie." Comedian Tommy Cooper may have died 25 years ago, but his likeness lives on the bottom of a steak pie. Chip shop owner Crad Jones discovered the image when eating his pie and chips in his shop in Caerphilly, South Wales, which was Cooper's hometown. Mr. Jones said he called the manufacturers Peter's Pies when he noticed the silhouette so they could document his find. Now, I'm 90% certain this is an advert for Peter's Pies. This is a way of getting Peter's Pies in the Daily Mail that day. And one of three scenarios that I can imagine behind this story. One is, it's chance, or, well, four scenarios, technically, it is Tommy Cooper's image and Tommy Cooper is the next coming of Jesus. You know, Tommy Cooper is the great Messiah that we all missed. I think that's probably unlikely at this point, so I'll discount that one for the time being. So either it's chance, it's pareidolia, it just happens to look a bit like Tommy Cooper, and this whole story grew up completely out of coincidence. Unlikely, because I don't know if you can see the picture very well. When you see the picture up close, it's far too perfect an image of Tommy Cooper. I think it's one of two scenarios. One is that Peter's Pies put out the pie, branded with Tommy Cooper, and just hoped whoever picked it up would report it to them, because it's quite a remarkable thing to see. There might be a number of pies, perhaps with other 70s comedians on them, I'm not quite sure. You know, there's a pie knocking around with Les Dawson on, probably, I don't know. So it's either that, or it's an advert for Peter. They've found a chip shop owner who sells their pies, and they've said, look, we'll get your name in the paper, we'll get our name in the paper, this will be a great story. But either way, I mean, I'm fairly confident that this is a way of getting the pie manufacturer, Peter's Pies, into the paper. And to illustrate the point a little bit more, Daily Mail reporter, that's the first time you'll see that, but that's one of the things that signifies it is just a press release. Another thing that signifies it is just a press release is that it appears word for word in another publication, completely word for word. It's a different picture, but this picture actually appeared further down in this story, so it's the same picture. It's word for word in the Metro, which I know is actually affiliated with the Daily Mail, but it was word for word in other sources as well. Here's another fantastic bit of PR that I picked up. I don't know if anyone, if you read my blog, you'll have seen this one, I mentioned this one on there. This one, they actually put a journalist's name on this. The journalist didn't go anywhere near the copy on this, because I've seen the original press release. The journalist printed this word for word and put their name on it, which I find staggering. It's amazing to think they've got such respect for their own profession, their own professional standing. But here's the headline. Think he knows you? Think again. How millions of men don't know their partner's dress size, date of birth, or even eye colour. I just missed the first paragraph because it's shit. Millions of British males are astonishingly ignorant about their partner's basic characteristics, including clothes size and even eye colour. Their failure to pay attention can at best lead to awkward conversations and, in extreme circumstances, even cause a relationship to break down. So the story here is that men are so shit at being in a relationship that they're in jeopardy, they should know all these interesting, important details about their girlfriends, and they simply don't know that, and that's their fault, and they need to fix that. Here's the next page of it. This is just sort of scrolling down. Here are some of the details that they should know. You know, you've got to clothes size, bra size, natural hair colour, shoe size, favourite perfume and job title. Here's the next paragraph. According to a survey of 2,000 men buying scent for their female partner at the perfume shop, 6 out of 10 believed they knew her inside out, and then it turns out they didn't know her inside out. So this is, you see there, the perfume shop. Why would the perfume shop put this story out? Well, you can see, for one thing, ignore the arrows, but you can see there's a nice picture of a bottle of perfume there, favourite perfume in the things you should know about your girlfriend. The other thing is the date, the 9th of February, 5 days before Valentine's Day. You're telling men you're shit at your relationship, your woman's going to leave you unless you know certain details. One of those details is her perfume, and this is where you can buy some. It's really that obvious, and I haven't got it here, but I saw the original press release that this was based on. So PR is absolutely everywhere. I haven't established that yet, but I will. It's actually even in the newswire, and this is the worst bit of all, really, is that 75% of news agency reported admitted they use PR often, and many others say they use it sporadically and to other varying degrees. So given that we know that the newswire is often put in verbatim by newspapers and by even trusted sources like the BBC, that the newswire is infiltrated by PR and considered to be perfect copy by these respected places doesn't bode well. And when you add those numbers together, you add in the PR plus the newswire, it's 60% of stories in the 4 main quality newspapers plus the Daily Mail, they're either wholly or largely PR or newswire. And a further 20% contain strong elements of PR or newswire, which means, at best estimate, 80% of all stories in what we consider to be the best journalism are either sourced from the newswire or PR, and we know that the newswire can be influenced by PR. This actually was a conservative estimate. This was the 2008 study at the Cardiff University, and this only included stuff that they could definitely trace back to PR. They said there was other stuff in there, quite a lot of it, that they thought probably felt a bit like PR, but because they couldn't confirm it was, they wouldn't put it down as such. So it's at least 4 in 5 stories are heavily influenced by sources other than that of the newspaper. So, given that PR is quite endemic in the newspaper, there's very few ways of easily spotting it. By definition, it's not easy to do because the whole point of a good PR piece is that you can't tell it's an advert. You can't tell it's just there to put the name in the paper. And the very, very best PR pieces are probably untraceable because they're done in such ways that they're very hard to track. They'll be done through phone calls, things like that, just sourcing through direct contact rather than disseminating a press release, which is a bit of an old and clunky way of doing it. But there is a bit of a rule of thumb, which I can't remember if I've invented or I ripped it off someone else. So if I ripped it off someone else, I'll credit them, whoever they are. But I did come up with, there is a rule of thumb in any case. If a company name appears around about paragraph 4 in the story, there's a very strong chance that that's the company that paid for this piece. Now it's not a guaranteed rule, but it's a useful kind of guide, and it makes sense. It makes sense empirically, I mean, we can see it in stories, and I'll point it out in a little bit. But it makes sense in terms of being a newspaper editor as well, because traditionally, when you were working in a print newspaper, often you'd write a story, and then at the last minute, a big story would come in, and you get moved from the front page to a smaller article somewhere. You've been bumped from 600 words to 300 words, something like that. So you want to make sure that you get all the salient details in your 300 words that gets cut. And to do that, you actually write the story not chronologically, but in terms of order of importance. So your first paragraph, you hit off all the main points of the story. And then you write it backwards throughout order of importance that way. And if an editor needs to cut your story in half, you cut from the bottom up and you don't lose any of the good stuff. So it makes sense that the person who paid for the story would place themselves around about paragraph 4 because it's high enough up to not get cut, but also low enough down so it's not in the very start of the story, so it's really obvious who they are, really obvious that they're behind it, so to make sure that they're not the lead in the message, they're just tagging along for the ride, for the publicity. There are many different types of examples of PR in the media. There are some that are much easier to track than others. Now, I'm going to go through some of the easier to track stuff for the duration of the rest of this talk. Pretty much any celebrity-based story is PR these days, pretty much. I mean, obviously there's some stuff that gets out that they don't particularly like, and that's the stuff that might be a bit closer to real news, if you want to call it that. But more stories, things like All of Heat magazine, Hello, OK, that kind of crap, that's all PR. If you look down the right-hand side of any Daily Mail website page, that's pretty much all just celebrity PR. And I'm sure we all know this, but there's also advertorials, you might see these. These are the articles that seem to be based around an entire product, and at the very bottom of the article online even you'll say to buy this product, visit this particular page. And they're put out there as if they're news, but they're just an advert. And then there's these non-event news stories. It's what the Guardian journalist Nick Davies calls non-event news stories, where they're news stories about nothing really. It's things like, boffins find the equation for the perfect XYZ. And a shock survey shows X. And we've seen these stories all the time, and these are almost always PR-driven. So, here's a celebrity story. This is one I found really interesting, not because of the obvious reasons, but for other reasons that are slightly less pervy. This is Abby Titmuss. I don't know if people know who she is. She was going out with John Leslie, who I won't talk about too much because I think he's one of yours, and I don't want to badmouth her. I wasn't sure whether to say that, but I've gone with it. This is Abby Titmuss. This was in October 2010, and the angle of the story here is there nothing Abby Titmuss won't do for publicity. Glamour model puckers up for lesbian kiss with Paradise Lost co-star. And it's saying last week she was doing this, but she's publicly hungry. And this story appeared a couple of days later. What a total Titmuss. Abby pulls a stretch too far in another of her workout for the cameras. And the angle of these two stories is, isn't she embarrassing? Isn't she horrid? Isn't she just desperate for attention? Isn't she publicity hungry? Has she no shame? This was a tweet put out by her PR company, PHA Media. Abby Titmuss has thanked PHA Media for the fantastic coverage we've generated to promote her new show, Paradise Lost. And you can see Paradise Lost here in the headline, and it is here in the second paragraph, not quite the fourth paragraph, but give me a break, I'm working here. But what I find really interesting about this is the angle of those last two stories isn't this show great? Isn't she great? Isn't she funny? Isn't she doing this? The angle is, isn't she horrible? Isn't she terrible? Isn't she embarrassingly publicity hungry? That's not an angle put in by the newspaper. That's an angle put in by her own PR to make headlines. And I find that really insidious. I find that really horrible. That her own, the people she pays to get her name out there, the angle that they take for her is she's a desperate, publicity hungry, horrible person, and it gets her in the papers, so their job's done, and she thanks them for the fantastic coverage she gets. This is an example of an advertorial. I only put this one up because I have no idea of anyone involved in the advertorial, but it's really clearly an advertorial. It says here, Nicki Minaj lipstick goes on eBay for over 4 times its original value after selling out in minutes. This went out just a couple of weeks ago, 31st of December. And the whole angle of the news story is a lipstick designed by this person here who is a rapper who hasn't put out an album yet, for MAC, who I'm reliably informed is a cosmetics company, apparently, has sold out. So the whole angle of this news story on the Daily Mail website is rapper about to put out album sells lipstick for cosmetic company. It's just an advert to get both the names of this unknown rapper into the headlines before she puts her album out, as well as putting the cosmetics out there. And these kind of stories happen all the time. There's a fantastic one recently which there was a weird kind of menage a trois between people in the media, which was Connie Hook, The Metro, and X Factor. And there was this weird week or so of stories of the 3 of them being involved in, two out of 3 being involved in each story. And it was Connie Hook wears a dress made out of the Metro, and then she had a Marilyn Monroe-esque dress made out of the Metro. And then the next day she was doing some of the X Factor, and the next day it was combining the X Factor and the Metro. And I haven't managed to track it down, otherwise I've included, but I was trying desperately to figure out the PR company involved in all 3 of those accounts. I guarantee it's the same company who's just combined 3 big-ticket items into one story. Getting on to the zany boffin formula. These are fantastic. These are everywhere and they're really horrible. This was one that came out the middle of July last year. Firm squeeze in 3 shakes. Scientists devised the formula for the perfect handshake. And it says here, it's been a traditional greeting, a symbol of peace, and a key part of the business deals for thousands of years, but today scientists announced that they've created a formula for the perfect handshake after it was revealed that 7 in 10 Britons are nervous about getting it wrong. More than 2/3 of people said they lacked confidence when it came to performing a gesture, according to a survey by Chevrolet. And unsurprisingly, this is an advert for Chevrolet. Here's the press release on their website to prove that it's actually them who's behind it. They're quite open about that. And here is this really long, complicated, weird-looking formula, which apparently is the perfect handshake. It says, well, you know, what I love about this formula is it says that that eye contact should be between none and too much. Verbal greeting, the verbal greeting involved should be between totally inappropriate and totally appropriate. So try and find a nice little balance. There's some fantastic bits in here. I'm trying to see completeness of grip. It should be either between very incomplete or too much. Dryness of hand should be somewhere between very damp and very dry. It's all bullshit stuff, but it looks really sciencey, so it's okay. And a couple of things could have happened here. I mean, this is actually from a scientist for the University of Manchester who's behind this formula. And again, a couple of things could have happened. It could have been that the scientist was already coming up with a formula for the perfect handshake. I mean, they play a lot of roles in interpersonal relationships. I'm sure a psychologist would love to see, I'm sure they could find something out about handshakes that they find interesting about the way people interact with each other. So maybe he was doing this research first, and then Chevrolet heard about it and thought, oh, brilliant, we'll jump on board with that. Maybe. Or maybe Chevrolet said to the scientist, here's some money, do some research, have a couple of months' worth of doing genuine research, and at the end, we'll publish your findings, but at least we've funded your research. Maybe. Or maybe Chevrolet wrote the entire thing themselves, missed off a line for the equation, then found a scientist willing to put an equation in there on the back of a fact packet in like a couple of hours' work. That's the third option. Now, the University of Manchester is actually quite close to Liverpool. And I know people who work for the University of Manchester. And I actually managed to find someone who got on the phone to the guy involved, Jeffrey Beattie. Have I got it here? No. I managed to find someone who was on the phone within hours to the guy involved, the University of Manchester psychologist, Jeffrey Beattie, who you might know from the first couple of series of Big Brother. So yeah, he's already psychologist for hire. And he confirmed the story. He said, essentially, he was sat there one day, he got an email from Chevrolet saying, hi, we've got this story, we want to tell people that our staff shake hands really well, they're very warm, they're very greeting, and we'd like to have a formula in there which shows that we know what we're talking about. Could you come up with a formula that shows how to shake hands? And he did. And that's how this whole story came about. So it came first from the angle. The story was fully written, 100% barring the equation, before they ever spoke to Geoffrey Beattie. And then he came along, scribbled a formula on the back of a fag packet involving not squeezing the hand too hard, but not squeezing it enough. You know, really obvious kind of stuff. Wrote it down in a very sort of scientific-looking way and sent it across them. And you know, it's based on common sense as much as anything else. And this is how this news story made. This news story didn't just make the Mail. It made, you know, the BBC. It made the Times. It made the New York Times. It made newspapers all around the world about this is the exact way. This is the perfect way to shake hands, as found out by scientists. And it was bullshit. It was an advert for Chevrolet. Now, the scientist involved, well, you know, why would he get involved? Well, he gets to put his name in the paper, he gets to put his name in the media, and if he's got a book out, which Geoffrey Beattie does, or if he wants to be on talk shows talking about what research he's doing, which is what he did from this, you know, he actually ended up on talk shows because of this story, talking about shaking hands, and at the end he tacked on a little bit about some of the genuine research he was doing, and in his head, that's fine, I'm getting my real research out there, it's not denigrating my work at all. Chevrolet, well, they get to look a bit legitimate. They get to look like this isn't just an advert. They get to look like there's some real science behind the way they shake hands, and that their forecourt salesmen are genuinely very, very inviting and very, very opening and very, very warm at greeting people. But the real problem with this is, I spoke to a lot of people about this story who weren't involved in researching and things like that, and what people's reaction to these kind of stories often tends to be is, have you got nothing better to do? You know, have we not found a cure for cancer yet? And yet we're figuring out whether we're shaking hands the right way. What a waste of time. You know, what funding are they getting for this? Are university funding, taxpayer money going to this? Could they not do some real research? It really denigrates the name of science in the newspapers in order to get a car company selling more fucking cars. And these aren't rare. They're not rare at all. I mean, here's a few examples. This was like literally 5 minutes of Google searching for the word. I think formula and boffin, I think I put in. Or no, it wasn't. It was formula for the perfect. And then it just fills in the rest of the sentence. Here's a few of them. I'll go through them quite quickly because I don't even push for time later on. Find out how to ride a bike using a mathematical formula, which was in the Metro, 26th of June. It was for Halfords National Cycle Week. Jessica Alba has the perfect wiggle, study says. That was in the Telegraph for Veet hair removal. The Veet PR company really fucked up there because they sent their request to Ben Goldacre to say, do you want to be the doctor involved? And he immediately published their entire email in full. Fantastic. Scientists discovered the secret of the perfect penalty kick, which is for Sky Sports in the Telegraph. Biscuit dunking perfected, which was for McVitie's. I mean, it's really obvious stuff. Scientists create the formula for perfect parking for Vauxhall. Is there any good ones here? New formula to revolutionise tea breaks. This is a good one because this appears every 6 months over the last 5 years, pretty much, for Tetley. And they say there's the formula for the perfect tea break and, you know, the perfect cup of tea, and it's always Tetley behind it. Pretty much every 6 months, reliably, for the last 5 years. And there's a one at the bottom there from The Sun. Boffins, you can tell it's from The Sun because they call them boffins, not scientists. Boffins think they've identified the formula for creating on-screen sexual chemistry, and that was for Sky Movies' Romantic Long Weekend. So it's really, really see-through, and it obeys the 4th paragraph rule, generally speaking. Have a look at the 4th paragraph, you'll see who funded this research. And the 4th paragraph rule is even more common in the thing I want to sort of touch on last, really, but this is quite a big chunk because this is how I obsessively spend about 60% of my waking time. The bullshit surprising surveys. I'm sure you've seen this before. It's the shock. 1 in 3 people do X, Y, Z, or you know, and these are incredibly popular. Just between Christmas and New Year, I did a quick search, and there were 25 articles published in the Daily Mail alone based on this formula that I tracked down to PR companies. 25 in 1 week. And almost always they obey the 4th paragraph rule. So I thought, rather than me just ranting at you, I thought I'd put up a couple here and see if you can sort of test your skills at PR spotting here. Gardening makes children happy and teaches new skills. Anyone want to hazard a guess? If you can't, don't read it, don't cheat. Who do you think put this out? Who do you think this is for? Anyone want to hazard a guess? Garden centre's not bad, go on.
I think I can see on the screen, Royal.
Well, that's cheating if you read it. That's not playing the game. It was the Royal Horticultural Society. So I mean, some of them are smaller, so you can't read it. It's fine. We're not going to blow all of the game just yet. But yeah, the Royal Horticultural Society. So gardeners say gardening makes children happy and join our society. You know that. Breakfast meetings more productive than lunches in the business world. Anyone? Kellogg's not a bad idea. Close. Costa Coffee. Because Costa already had the lunchtime market sewn up. So then what they want to do is they want to get people drinking in their coffee shops on a morning before work as well. So you tell everybody that it's a good idea to have your breakfast meetings in there, and that's how they break into that market. Technology becomes the most popular homework excuse. No longer is it, dog ate my homework, it's my computer crashed. Anyone?
Dixon's, Carries, not bad.
Nice ideas, not bad. It was a company called Morsey, who are an internet backup company. So, kids are complaining that the computer crashes, says company whose job is to back up data. It's amazing. So these all came from a company called OnePoll, who are market research, and I use that word very lightly, a market research company who are online, who I think they're pretty much now my nemesis, I think. I've had some fairly high-profile run-ins with them. This is actually just one grab of the stories that they've personally put into the press between the 24th of December and the 13th of December. So there's quite a lot of them, and that was actually a quiet month because it was December. And they're a really, really awful company. What they do is they have a very set formula, which over time I've managed to sort of work out exactly. And it's a formula you could probably guess, having seen some of these stories, but it's really explicit when it comes to theirs. Essentially, they come up with a story first, they come up with an angle on it. So they've said up front, we want to promote the idea of gardening, so we'll get the idea that children find gardening makes them happy. That's the angle we want to go for. And now we'll design a survey which figures out results that back up those findings. So we'll make sure that we design a survey that gets all those answers that we actually want. And to do that, they bias the questions quite spectacular. I've got some great examples of them coming up. But they make sure the questions are biased to lead to the results that they want. So you don't have you have a free choice. You very rarely have the choice that you want. You very rarely get an open question. It's very often the kind of questions that are psychologically leading or are worded in very specific ways to lead you into a conclusion you wouldn't otherwise draw. And they actually said themselves, then you pull an irrelevant sample set to ensure a desired result. This is really good because it's all done online. So you sign up to OnePoll and you get a couple of surveys that you can take each day. Pretty much, a couple each day. But they're all preceded with sample questions, with screening questions. So they have questions like, are you in a relationship? Now, you get paid for taking each survey you take, but you get paid a really pittance amount. So your emphasis, your motivation isn't to put across truth, is to get 10 pence for your 30 seconds a minute on the internet. So your screening question, are you in a relationship, when the headline of the survey that you can see is all about relationships, you're going to say yes. You're not going to say no, you're not going to say, I don't want my 10 pence just yet. I'm going to say yes. And then from then on, every answer you give is bullshit. Because you're not in a relationship, you're not the right sample set. There's nothing built into the system to try and eradicate that, or to try and disincentivise people from taking polls that they're not eligible for. And then they actually, once they get out the results from 3,000 people, this is a word they use themselves on their website, they data mine those results to figure out any other interesting angles. So if you designed a survey to come up with a certain result, and it doesn't come up with that result, they then just look through what seems anomalous in the data, and that becomes their angle. So if something just happens to come up because they happen to poll people who don't really like gardening, then they'll spin it off that. It's not in any way based on the veracity of the questions and answers or what they were looking for. It's all just mining the data after the fact. And then they publish it, almost always directly word for word in the Daily Mail, the Telegraph or the Express, sometimes the Independent, but those ones seem the worst. Unless it's about sex, in which case the Sun snaps it up every single time. And as I said, users are paid around about 10 pence for taking a survey with OnePoll, but you're not actually allowed any cash from them until you've accrued £40. So with other incentives they throw in, it's more than 300 surveys you've got to take before you get a single penny out of them. Now, I've been doing it for about 9 months now, and I think I'm on about £17. It's really, really hard to make any money. So I genuinely reckon that OnePoll pay about 1% or less of anyone who takes part in their data, their research. They don't get any money out of it, I don't think. And as I say, there's a huge incentive for taking surveys, just so you can skip through, get your 10 pence as quickly as possible, because you don't want to spend any time on this, because it's only 10 pence. The thing is, every story that OnePoll get from these surveys, they sell for more than £3 grand. I actually found it was 3,500 for every story that makes the news. So they actually make a pretty penny off this, given that they're not outlaying anything on the participants of the surveys, but they're getting a hell of a lot for getting it straight in the news. And they get round about 3 articles a day into the news, so they're making a decent amount into this, and they're contributing quite a lot of bullshit into the news. Here's an example of the dodgy questioning that they do, the biased questioning. This was a story, this was a poll, I'll come up with the data in a little bit on a following slide, but here's the question. Who do you prefer to work for, men or women? And here's your choices, men or women. Personally, I don't really give a shit who I work for. You know, if they're a good boss or a bad boss, I don't mind, you know, what genitals they have. So I would have said, I'm not bothered, or none, or if I wasn't trying to earn 10 pence or more likely embarrass one poll, I wouldn't have taken the survey. But many people just said, right, men, it's the first option, I'll click it. It was from a poll I took part in, and I wrote it in June 2010, so it's a genuine poll. Next question, you won't be able to see these answers, but they're brilliant. This was directly after who do you want to work for, who are better, 50-50, but you have to choose one. If you prefer to work for a man, why is this? Right, it's a multiple choice here, lots of options. We've got here, Christ, can I read it there? I can't actually read it. Alright, yeah. They're less likely to get involved in office politics, they're easier to reason with, we've got their straight talking. Why else would you be working for a man? No time of the month. That's a lovely one. And there's some fantastic ones in there that I can't quite see if I can focus it to make it out better. No, I can't. Okay, but yeah, so they've got some fairly dodgy reasoning in there, and obviously people are going to tick one of these boxes, and most of the boxes on here are fairly shitty. You know, they're more reasonable than women. They're less likely to take. They're less likely to fly off the handle than women. It's all really, you can already see the headlines that come from this. And you have to choose one. I mean, I chose other and said this is sexist and stupid. That one didn't make the news, unfortunately. And this one here, this is question 4. Okay, if you prefer to work for a man, why do you think women make bad bosses? Now, I don't. I might prefer to work for a man. I don't think women make bad bosses. Even if I prefer, it's just a preference. I'm not saying that women are bad bosses, but all of a sudden those words are put in my mouth, and they're backed up with really dodgy reasons. Why are they bad bosses? They're hormonal. They bitch all the time. They can't leave their personal life at home. They'll stab others in the back. They're more competitive. This is the best one. They lie. 2 words. Fantastic. And I chose... Oh, and there's also they're so highly strung. Fantastic. I chose this is so sexist and stupid. Again, that didn't make the headlines. This made the headlines. Men are the best bosses. Women at the top are just too moody. And it's the women themselves who say so. Again, Liz Hull wrote this up. Did she fuck have seen the press release? This is word for word. They are hormonal, incapable of leaving their personal lives at home, and only too happy to talk about their staff behind their backs. Female bosses are a nightmare to work for, a survey of employees concludes. 2/3 of women said they preferred a male boss because they're straight talking, get to the point, attitude makes them easy to deal with. And the whole thing was just bullshit for a website, ukjobs.net, just to get the idea of, you know, talking about bosses. I don't really like my boss too much, I'm going to look for another job. This is really horrible. This is really sexist bullshit. And it's just there to get ukjobs.net in the news. It's unbelievable. Here's another one that was in the news recently. This was very recent, 13th of January. Quarter of sports fans opt for team over partner. I don't know if anyone saw this. It was in local news, but I wanted to pick it up for a very specific reason. More than a quarter of sports fans in Leicester would opt for their football team over their wife or girlfriend if they had to make such a choice, a survey has said. A survey by the new social betting exchange Better.com revealed that nearly 1 in 4 men in the UK would pick their football team over the wife or girlfriend if push came to the shove. The poll of 3,000 sports fans revealed 22% of men would dump their girlfriend before sacrificing their beloved football team. The reason I picked this one up is, that's from the 13th of January. I wrote this on my website on the 21st of December. Because I took part in this survey and I thought, I can see these questions. So this was my version. That I thought I'd write the news ahead of time and see how accurate I could be from taking part in the survey. 1 in 4 British men... Quarter. Bang. 1 in 4 British men would rather kiss goodbye to their girlfriend than their team's chance of a cup win. A recent survey of 1,000 UK fellas, it was 3,000, that shot too low, revealed that a quarter of men put footy above nookie. I figured this would be in the sun. With more than 1 in 5 confessing they'd rather be dumped than have their team be dumped out the cup. To make matters worse, almost 1/3 of men would choose football over their partner. These startling results were revealed after research was carried out by a betting exchange company, fictional bet exchange company, I just made one up, I'm going to put one in there, ahead of the 3rd round of the FA Cup this weekend, the 8th of January 2011. It was actually just after the FA Cup, I was close. And the reason I knew this was because I took part in the survey. Here are the questions. Question 1, 2, 3, they're fantastic. If it came to it and you had to choose between your partner and your football team, which one would you choose? Partner, football team. Which of the following scenarios would you be most upset about? Football team losing the FA Cup final, partner dumping me, 50-50. And then question 3, do you know what a betting exchange is? Alright, I'm not psychic, I'm not going for $1 million challenge, it was a bit of a gag. But yeah, so just fantastic. And one poll had this horrible record with sex. They're constantly pulling out sex stories that I think are really, really horrible. Here's one. Headline was in, I can't remember which publication it was in, I think it was the Mail probably. Poor show chaps, survey reveals nearly 1 in 10 women fake it between the sheets. 1 in 10 women fake an orgasm almost every single time they make love, according to a poll. You know, the angle on this is really, really horrible. It's saying that men you shit between the sheets, that when you don't satisfy a woman, you're inadequate, you're useless. It was an advert for Stimulate performance-enhancing drink. So, you're shit at performing, but this drink can make you better. It's really, really obvious stuff. Here's another fantastic one. A survey carried out among 4,000 housewives revealed a large portion think Clarkson, Jeremy Clarkson, is the proud owner of a 10.25-inch penis. For one thing, this was a survey done for online dating site fbuddy.com. I'll leave you to fill in that F. What I liked about this one was, obviously, we don't know what size Jeremy Clarkson's penis is. I saw this survey, I can't remember why I saw it. I think someone sent me it because I'm not a woman, so I didn't get to judge. But it was just a list of celebrities, about 8 celebrities, and you had to just tick one of them. And then you have to just speculate over the size of his penis. What I really like about this is that there is no way of knowing what size Jeremy Clarkson's penis is until you see it. You know, and if you can't see it, it's just speculation. It might be big, it might be small. Essentially, it's Schrodinger's cock. Yeah, there you go. There's a really horrible one from Quiet Garlic saying that if you're over 45, sex is shit now. I don't know why Garlic Company wants to tell you that, but it gets garlic in the news. Having an extramarital affair is good for your health, which is for online dating site, livinglinks.com. 1 in 5 women would forgive their man for a one-night stand as long as it meant nothing to them, which is for online dating site, livinglinks.com. Forget the 7-year itch. A marriage goes stale after 10 years and 11 months. Married couples begin to grow bored with each other after 10 years and 11 months, according to researchers. For online dating site, livinglinks.com, within 4 months, those 3 surveys came out of one poll. One poll really wants to get you laid. They really, really want to get you laid. It's a charity act, it is. This is one of my favourite things I think I've ever seen. And if anyone follows any of the stuff I do anywhere else, you've probably seen this one, but I love this one, so I had to include it. At last, guys, what turns women on? And it's not chocolate, this was the sun. This was the sun. Heading off on holiday is an even bigger turn-on for women than sex. A trip away topped a poll to find the most exciting things in a woman's life, followed by becoming a mum. How reductive is that? Romping with a loved one was third. I did say it was the sun. Followed by a pay rise. Right, now I'm going to stand in front of this so no one can cheat. If anyone's got there, don't answer. But what was the 5th most exciting thing in a woman's life? Any women in the audience? We've already got sex, holiday, being a mum, and a pay rise. 5th most exciting thing. Sorry? Shopping, shoes, babies. Well, we had becoming a mum. We've covered that. Okay, so shopping, shoes, the best answers. Here's what appeared in the Sun, and it's brilliant. I'll read that sentence again. Romping with a loved one was 3rd, followed by a pay rise, and backing a winner on the horses in 5th. Next paragraph, paragraph 4. Horse racing promotion body raceforchange.com carried out a study of 4,000 housewives. Brilliant. I mean, would anyone have said the 5th most exciting thing in their life, women? No. They found 4,000 apparently. But they're also, it's not just the sex that they do, they're really sexist as well. This stuff, basically you can grab a headline in a survey by just coming up with something either sexist or filled with sex. And the sex is really, really quite horrible. Here's some bad ones. We've already covered the perfume one, which is saying your man is inadequate and useless, doesn't know anything about you. Men, go out and buy perfume, otherwise you're a shit boyfriend. Here's one. 2/3 of women are completely bored with their lives. A survey for floret fruits. I don't know why floret fruits would make you more excited about your life, but apparently they think that's a good angle for them. This was a good one. 4 in 10 people are feuding with their family, with women blamed for starting the trouble. This was for 20th Century Fox, home entertainment. Family Guy was to celebrate the release of the Family Guy box set. And the whole angle of the article was to say that loads of families aren't getting on, there's loads of factions and arguments and things, and it's all women's fault. That's literally was pretty much a quote from the article. It was horrible. And this is the worst one I think I've ever seen. 1 in 10 women have tricked a man into getting them pregnant, with less than half actually wanting the person they used to stick around once the baby was born. And this was for Bounty Parenting Club in November, and this one was really horrible. And this is it in the Sun here, because I thought it only appeared in a little nub like this, little news in brief thing, a nib. But I had to put it in because the language in this shows what's wrong with these stories, why these stories are really insidious. 1 in 10 mums tricked, block capitals, their fella into getting them pregnant, a survey revealed yesterday. Top rusers were lying about being on the pill, or just not mentioning contraception. A quarter of those who duped their man said he would have given him one day anyway, but half said they weren't even bothered if the father stuck around. So we've got in there, tricked, duped, lying, rude. You've got this horrible angle that that 10% of women are horrible, horrible liars. Now, speaking to Petra Boynton, who's a psychologist who specialises in sort of sexual health, it's actually a significant factor in domestic abuse, is the idea of paranoia over paternity, and the fear of the idea of having been trapped into a family, into a relationship, into fatherhood early. It's one of the significant factors, not the significant factor, but a contributing factor to domestic abuse cases. But Bounty think this is a good idea to flog their parenting club website. Really horrible stuff. So that's an overlook of some of the PR that's going on. I guarantee when you go away from here and you start reading the news and things like that, you will spot this stuff absolutely everywhere. It's completely endemic. Fortunately, there are some positive signs at the moment. I've been speaking to journalism students at various different universities, and their lecturers tell them you don't touch PR. PR is now blacklisted. You can't use PR copy. You use it at very, very best as demonstrative of something, but you don't print it, and you certainly check everything. On top of that, the internet and skepticism make it really hard for PR companies, because 15 years ago, 10 years ago, before the internet was really, well, 15 years ago, I guess, I have no idea when the internet was really popular, when this stuff only appeared in print journalism, it was very, very hard to track. You had to read every newspaper to pick it up, to compare the two. These days, you just Google a quote. You pick out a quote and Google it, and if you find it replicated in a million different places, and one of those on a PR company's website or a company's website, then this is how you find out that this stuff is nonsense. It's a real significant clue to finding this stuff out. So the internet is making it really difficult for PR companies to put this out, which is why they're often no longer good PR companies, or the bad PR companies who are very good at being bad, no longer put out press releases to a huge audience. They're more phone up specific journalists or send them specific emails, and that's how you seed stories, because it's so easy these days to track a story that's been seeded in a huge, huge place. On top of that, there's been examples where the BBC, for example, have linked to their data when they put up a survey story or something like that. They link to the data, so you can actually look through the data and look through the questions that were asked, the answers that were available, and decide for yourself whether it's a genuine survey or a bullshit survey. Wherever you see that, wherever you see data that you think might be dodgy, you should get in contact with the people who put the story out there. Whether you go straight to the news or try and find the company involved, if you contact them, they should give you that data. That data should be open if they're practicing ethically. If they're not, then it's a very, very clear sign. If they don't give you that data, it's a clear sign that they're not interested in ethical practice. And also what you can do is, and it's something that people are doing more and more, is when you see one of these stories, like this horrible Bounty parenting one, you go straight to Bounty and you make complaints, you find their sponsors and you make complaints to their sponsors saying, is this really the kind of company you want to be paying? Is this the kind of company you want to be funding? And you can really hit the sponsorship of people who engage in this really horrible, unethical PR, and that's really, really useful stuff. And also, I have a whale of a time investigating this, and I think that's one of the things that I personally get out of this. I really enjoy this. And I hope you've enjoyed my little kind of tour of bad PR in the news, really.
Well done.